Hi, Math 12. So we'll begin our next unit, which is starting to look at trigonometry. So the first unit's on trigonometry and the unit circle. We'll cover angles and angle measure. Okay, so you're used to using degrees, so let me just start with the grid that we would use for degrees. Okay, so remember we have the four quadrants, and we go counterclockwise. Okay, so 1 to 4. So you're used to that. Now, if we incorporate angles, we start in quadrant 1, so this would represent 0 degrees, and then 90, 180, 270, and then one full rotation gets us back to 360. Okay, so that some of you are familiar with that, especially those of you who've taken physics. You would have gotten into that when doing your vector calculations. Now, let's look at a different way to describe the same thing, and it's in terms of what we call a radian. Okay, so first off, a definition of a radian is basically the subtended central angle. So that's the angle that basically contains two radiuses, and that hit an arc, and that arc length is equal to the radius. Okay, so basically it's like a slice of pizza where you've got the two sides and also the curved exterior all of the same length, and that's the length of the radius. So that's what we define that's what we define as a radian. Now, in terms of a rotation, so we still start with 0. Okay, so it still goes counterclockwise. So here's 0, and then instead of 90 degrees, what we do is we call the 90-degree equivalent as pi over 2, and then the 180 we call that pi, and then 270 that's going to be 3 pi over 2, and then a full rotation is referred to as 2 pi. Okay, so again, it still goes counterclockwise. So one full rotation then in terms of angles is 360 degrees, and in terms of radians is defined as 2 pi. Okay, so one full rotation or a revolution, whichever way you want to describe that. So first thing I want to look at is basically how we can calculate degrees into radians and radians into degrees. Okay, so we see that 2 pi equals 360, so we can just we can also write that then if we want to reduce that as pi equals 180 degrees. So you're basically using that relation to go back and forth. Okay, so now when you so example 1, we want to draw a picture of how it's what that angle looks like, and then do the conversion. So if it's in degrees, let's convert into radians, and if it's in radians, let's convert into degrees. So minus 270. So the minus sign is basically saying instead of going counterclockwise, which is what we typically do, this would be clockwise. Okay, so what's going to happen here is 270 means that you're going to rotate clockwise, beginning at 0 and going in the negative direction, and this would be a rotation. So that this will be negative 270. Okay, and now let's figure out what that is in radians. So negative 270 is going to equal negative 270 times pi over 180, right? So there's what that's basically saying is 180 degrees is equivalent to a pi, and so this is going to equal negative 3 pi over 2. Okay, so that's because it's negative 270 over 180. You can reduce that to negative 3 over 2. Okay, let's do 150. So this time it's written in the positive direction. So 150 would be going like this. Okay, so that would be 150. So I remember, if you go all the way across, it's 180, right? So it's a little bit less than 180. So same idea to get the angle here. So we go 150 is going to equal 150 times pi over 180. And that's going to equal 5 pi over 6. Okay, Okay, now let's look at it in terms of the using the pi, the radians. Okay, so there's a couple ways you can do that. You'll see it written with the value of pi in there, or you'll see it without the value of pi written in there. So that's the difference between C and D. Remember, pi is approximately 3.14. So let's start with C. Okay, so here's our grid. So 7 pi over 6 is greater than 1 pi, right, which would be 6 over 6. So it's going to be after midway, so a little bit after midway. Okay, so that would be your 7 pi over 6. Okay, and then now we kind of do this the opposite in terms of that conversion factor. Instead of pi over 180, we're going to use 180 over pi. So 7 pi over 6 is going to be equal to 7 pi over 6 times 180 over pi. And that's going to equal 210 degrees. Okay. Which makes sense because it's in quadrant 3. Okay, the last one here, negative 1.2. So if we're not sure where exactly is negative 1.2, we can look at the fact that pi is 3.14. Okay, pi over 2, so 3.14 divided by 2 is 1.57. Pi over 4 is 3.14 divided by 4, that's 0.785. Okay, so where we are then is we're in between, right? So we're in between these two. Okay, so in terms of what that's going to look like, and remember we're going in the negative direction. So this would be like midway between midway of quadrant 4 would be pi over 4. So we're a little bit more than that. Okay, so this would be negative 1.2. Okay, and so that's going to equal negative 1.2 times 180 over pi, which will equal negative 68.8 degrees. Okay, so you should be familiar with the quadrants and know where what we call the terminal arm, where you end off, where that's going to be. Okay, now one thing you know about a rotation is that you can rotate more than once, and you can end up back at the same spot, right? And so that's what this next point is referring to when we talk about what we call coterminal angles. So those are angles in the standard position with the same terminal arm. So you can look at this in degrees or radians. So when they don't give you any type of inequality that you have to fit within, there's basically an infinite number of answers. Okay, so here they're asking, given the angle that or radians that we have, find one positive and one negative angle that it's coterminal with. Okay, so if we want 270, we just basically go 270 plus 360, so that's another full rotation. And what we're saying here is this brings you back to where you are. Okay, so 630 degrees. So that would be a positive. If we want to look at a negative, just subtract 360. That just means you're rotating the other way. That would be 90 degrees, negative 90. Okay, so negative 90 and 630 are in the same spot as 270. Okay, if we've got a pi value, then we just basically add 2 pi. Okay, so here we're going to have negative 5 pi over 4. So it's just like adding 360, but now we're going to add 2 pi. Okay, so if we want to add fractions, we just have to make sure that we put that over a common denominator. So that'll be 8 pi over 4, which is the same thing as 2 pi. And that gives us 3 pi over 4. Okay, and then if we want to get a negative, instead of adding, we just subtract. So this will be negative 5 pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4, which equals negative 13 pi over 4. Okay, let's look at the next one here, 740. So 740 plus 360, so that equals 1100. Okay, now for this one, what you'll find is if you do the subtraction now, because we're looking to find a negative value, that won't be enough, right? So that'll still give us positive. So then what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to keep subtracting until we have enough to get us negative. Okay, so you see what we've done there. We subtracted by 3 rotations, and that's why we've written out 360 3 times. Now, in terms of like a question on a quiz or a test, like I said, because of what we just looked at, there's an infinite number of answers. Typically, what you'll see is, and that's what this statement is expressing, is that there are infinite number of answers, because you see what I did with that's negative there. I just kept adding in 360s, and that's what this statement is saying. It's saying theta, which is the angle symbol, plus or minus 360, meaning you can keep times n, which is the number of times you can keep adding or subtracting 360. So there's an infinite number of answers. So typically, when given a question on a test or a quiz, what we'll do is we'll say find it within some set of restraints. Okay, so some confined length. So here it's negative 360. The angle has to be greater than negative 360 and less than 360. Okay, or in terms of pi, greater than or equal to negative 2 pi and less than 2 pi. So that's how you'll see the question. It'll give you some type of range that they want you to fit it in. So you basically do exactly the same thing as we just finished doing, but now you're only exclusively looking at the answers that fit within that range. So minus 500 is going to be minus 500 plus 360. Okay, so that gives you negative 140. Okay, so that fits between negative 360 and positive 360. And then what we can do is we can take that negative 140, add another 360, and that gives us 220 degrees. Okay, so these two answers would be your two answers that fit into that. Okay, 650. So here we go, 650 minus 360, which gives us 290 degrees, and then 290 minus 360 gives us negative 70 degrees. Okay, so both of these fit within that range. Okay, so there'd be two answers. Typically, when students do these type of questions, they end up forgetting one of the answers, or they'll put an answer that goes beyond that range. Okay, so just make sure that you're just working within that range. And then if it's in terms of pi, so here we can go, so 9 over 4, that's more than 2, so that's outside of the range. So what we'll do is we'll go 9 pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4, so that's just 2 pi, which equals pi over 4. And then we've got pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4, which equals negative 7 pi over 4. Okay, and so these would be your two answers. Okay, lastly, let's look at what we call arc length. Okay, so arc length is just how it sounds. It's the distance around the exterior of the circle between two set points that are connected to the center. Okay, so this distance here between A and B, this would be defined as small a. Okay, so that would be your arc length. And so when using this equation, the thing you have to look at is theta is the central angle, and it's measured in radians. So here you notice how we have an angle of 45 degrees. So it's not in radians. So the first thing you'd want to do is convert that. Okay, so 45 degrees, we would just go 45 times pi over 180. And that's going to give us pi over 4. Okay, so that's your angle in terms of radians, and now you can just utilize that equation So A equals theta r. R is the radius, right? So you've got your angle is pi over 4. Your radius is 12, so that could be like 12 centimeters or 12 meters. The unit's not provided to us. And so your arc length then is going to equal 12 pi over 4, which is just 3 pi. Okay, so I'll stop there, and you can do the set questions now that go with this.